Okay. This is Rashad with Journey to a Million. Today I have a very, very, very special guest. Mr. Kevin L. Matthews II is a #1 best-selling author and a former financial advisor. He has helped hundreds of individuals plan for their retirement, in addition to managing more than $140 million in assets during his advisory career. By 2017, he was named one of the top 100 most influential financial advisors by Investopedia. Back in 2010, he launched Building Bread to inspire millennials to set, simplify, and achieve any financial goal. Mr. Matthews, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Hey, man, I can't complain, man. I'm honored to be here with you. I think I've been trying to set this up for a long time, and we just have not been able to cross paths, and we're finally here today, man.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thank you.
I'm excited. So, hey, I gave a little overview of who you are. If you can just touch on a few things that people who are seeing you for the first time might want to hear and get to know about you, can you go ahead and give that information?
Sure. So I actually started my business, Building Bread, back in 2010. So it's been 12 years now. I started as a sophomore at Hampton University and started my career after graduating as a teacher. So a lot of what I do when it comes to personal finance, teaching people about investing, comes from a place of education, making things simple and making things actionable. I've worked on Wall Street for a number of years as a financial advisor and then decided, look, I want to be able to give this information to the people that need it most. And that's when I started writing books, doing more podcasts, and just educating the masses and getting the message out as best I could.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and forgive you for being a Hampton grad. I'm a Bethune-Cookman grad, so
I mean, I could have been FAMU. It could have been worse.
That's true. But hey, it's all love and respect. So if you can just talk a little bit about generational wealth. I know that's kind of a buzz term now, and people seem to overuse it, but you seem to come from an area of, hey, we need to practice generational wealth. We need to educate those who are coming behind us so that they can't make the same mistakes that we made.
Yeah, and for me, it's exactly that, making sure the next generation doesn't make the exact same mistakes. But I think for me, more importantly, it's setting them up to be successful and making sure that they have the funds and the knowledge that I wasn't given or that they weren't given, and making sure that, hey, look, when you graduate college or when you just graduate high school, the standard is to have $100,000. The standard is to have $500,000 by the time you're 25, as opposed to having $0 or $5 in your bank account, which is what I had when I first started. So for me, it's starting very early on the education front, starting very early on the savings and investing front, and making it commonplace. Not like, oh, that's extraordinary. It's like, no, this is regular. This is what we do. These are conversations that we have. And that is the part for me of ingraining generational wealth and making sure that you're actually taking part in building it.
Good stuff. So I'm always, obviously intrigued to see what people's financial backgrounds looks like from when they grew up. You have most people that are in these spaces that we're in, they come from nothing when it comes to finances, and it really motivated them to get into these spaces and start to teach others about what they need to do and to avoid the same mistakes that we made. Or it's not even necessarily mistakes, because sometimes we just don't know. You don't know what you don't know. So what was your upbringing like with money?
Yeah, my father was a firefighter. The majority of his career, I think more than 20 years. My mom worked for a number of banks and worked for the city as a public employee. And for me, my upbringing, my dad was an avid reader. So whether it was Rich Dad, Poor Dad, or it was just a book about the Clintons or Barack Obama, he was just a really avid reader. And for us, he really taught us the savings and budgeting part of things. He wasn't really a big investor growing up. He was like, look, make sure you put some money away, make sure you give some money. And that was kind of it. So that was my upbringing. I think what had a bigger impact on me was being from Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is the home of Black Wall Street, and learning and seeing that up front and realizing that 100 years ago, well, more than 100 years ago now, but 100 years ago, we had all of this wealth. Everyone was relatively wealthy. We had businesses, we had theaters, we had hospitals. And then growing up in the 80s and 90s, not seeing any of that. And there were decades where we didn't have our own grocery store on our side of town. So for me, it was, okay, I understand a little bit about, spending less than what I bring in, but like, how do I rebuild what we had? How do I really, truly build wealth? So from there, I went to New York for my first internship on Wall Street and was utterly just smacked in the face didn't understand any words they were using, just utterly confused because I'd never heard of the stock market. I never knew how to invest, and it wasn't something that was available to me as a kid. So after that, I said, look, people out here making money left and right. People are understanding the stock market. I need to be able to learn it and teach it. And that was like that my origin story, if you will, because right after that internship, I went to my dorm room, started the business, and it's still alive to this day.
Man, good stuff. So you have a brand new investor. You have an individual who has no idea what the stock market is. They just come to you and they just have questions about what to do with their money. 18 years old, 17 years old. How do you educate them? How do you even get them to start understanding what investing is?
Yeah, what I always say is it is investing is ownership, is a representation of ownership in a particular company for the most part. So if you are into Nike shoes, if you love going to Target, love going to Starbucks, when you buy a share of stock, it says that you are an owner of this company. And as that company does well, your money goes up. If that company does not do well, then that money goes down. And I tell them that over time, that money compounds and it grows. And when you start to own good companies and you hold good companies, then your wealth will grow over time. And that is really one of the easiest, most consistent ways to build generational wealth and become a millionaire.
Okay, so you talk about owning good companies. Mm-hmm. How do you know what a good company is to own?
Yeah, so that one's a deeper question. There are several ways. Number one, you want to see if the business is financially stable. You want to know whether or not a company is making money on a consistent basis. So you can look at a number of things to figure that out. An income statement, which is basically a budget for a company, it'll tell you this is how much money this company made, or this is how much a company lost. I think most of us here, if you heard of a company that lost $1 billion every year for the past 10 years, you're like, I don't know. That's probably not a company for me, right? So just looking at some of that basic information, also just understanding what the world is moving to, right? And where the world is going. Do you think that a Walmart is going to go bankrupt? Probably not, right? Do you think an Amazon is probably going to go bankrupt? Probably not. So looking at some of those basic things can help you determine what's a good company and what's not. Again, we can do an entire hour on that, but those are just some of the basics. Is the company making money? Is the company growing? And I like to say, like, how have they done over the last like 2 or 3 years? And that can give you a good indication of whether or not it's something that's worth investing in or something you probably want to avoid.
Okay, great information. And I was actually looking at one of your videos the other day, and you were talking about how you don't even really necessarily check your portfolio. I think you check it in June and then you check it in December, which sounds similar to what I do. I check it more often, but it doesn't bother me, whatever happens to it. Mm-hmm. While you don't check it often, it sounds like you are more of an active investor rather than passive, because I think you were able to actually beat the market with some of your investments. Mm-hmm. So can you kind of explain that?
Yeah, so I like to say I'm a little bit in the middle. So for me, what I try to do is I hold index funds that, if for those that don't know, index funds they invest in an entire segment of the market. So 500 companies as a whole, that's the S&P 500. So I invest in things like that, but also try to choose good quality companies that tend to beat the market. Historically, Apple is one of those. So what I like to do is say, look, I'm gonna get my index fund. That's really the basics. I think almost every investor should have some portion of their money there. But then I also say, look, I think, based on my analysis and based on what I know about X, Y, and Z company, I'm also going to add some money here and tend to hold those and reevaluate about once every 6 months or so. So for me this year, I was able to beat the market the last 2 years or so. And we'll see. That is not what happens every single year, but I'm not letting that lead the story, right? It's like, oh, okay, great, I did it, but I'm not going to use this for another 25 years. So I'm going to keep it on the back burner and continue with my process.
Yeah, you were kind of nonchalant about like, I beat the market.
I mean, because you never know. Like, that was a good day for me to go look.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah, so, it definitely depends.
So basically, what you own those particular stocks twice. Mm-hmm. So you own it in the index fund, and then you have so much confidence in those stocks that you say, okay, I'm gonna buy some individual stocks as well, in addition to those I own in the index fund.
Yes.
Got it. So because those index funds, particularly VTSAX, FZROX, mm-hmm. they are top heavy with those companies anyway. So I can see why you would beat the market. So that's actually a pretty good strategy.
Yeah, it certainly can be. And that's the thing too. I think sometimes when people say, oh, I beat the market, they think I'm doing like this amazingly complex thing. When in reality, sometimes like again, like a company like Apple has beaten the market, with the exception of this year, in 2022, it beat the market decades at a time, right? So I just had a little bit more money in Apple and a little bit more money in Microsoft, and that was pretty much it. It wasn't anything like super complex or secretive in that way.
Gotcha. So, somebody might ask you, they might say, hey, why not just buy all Apple or all Nike or something like that?
Yeah, and that's a fair question. The question for me, or the answer for me, is it depends on risk. When you do that, you're putting all of your risk in one company. And in some years it may pay off wonderfully, and in others it may not. One interesting one is like a Netflix. Netflix before the pandemic was named the stock of the decade. It was an amazing company. They didn't have that many competitors, but now you can look at them, right? Where it's down like 50, almost 60%. And if you had all your money on Netflix or something, that ain't the best thing for you. So what I try to do is not get overconfident and not say, well, Apple is the best thing ever. I'm not going to do anything else. So I want to make sure that I'm diversified, that I afford myself the ability to be wrong. So that's why I still hold index funds. It's why I invest in multiple companies to kind of balance things out in case I'm wrong. Cause I don't have the blood pressure to put everything on one company and just hope everything works out.
Man, those are great points. I know, just like you have the S&P 500 today, I believe they had like the top 10 stocks back from the 40s or 50s. And then if you track those companies, I'm not sure that any of them are still in existence today.
Yeah, I think ExxonMobil might have been the only one.
Maybe ExxonMobil. Okay.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, and because I was doing some research the other day, and it was ExxonMobil was the Apple of like the 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s. It was like the best employer, it paid the most, best dividends. And then between like 2010 and 2020, you never heard of that stock. It was terrible. Everybody was going to electric vehicles, and we were more environmentally conscious, and it was one of the worst stocks. And now we are in an oil crisis, gas prices are going up, and now it's one of the best stocks. So like what going in isn't always going to be the case. One of these companies is going to be a blockbuster, and some are going to vanish, and some are going to stand the test of time.
Man, that's some good points. Very good points. So if you are talking to a new investor, what would be some of the do's and don'ts for that individual?
Yeah, I would say some of the do's is be patient. I think that we get into a space where we think that investing is automatically going to be like overnight, I'm going to become wealthy. Overnight, I'm going to build generational wealth. And that is not the case. Sometimes it takes a generation to build generational wealth. So that's number one. Number two is be consistent. Again, it's not, oh, I'll put $100 in one time and never touch it. It's usually I'm putting $100 a week, $100 a month, $200 a month, whatever amount you can put in, and doing that on a consistent basis, day in and day out. And that's where your money starts to really grow. So being consistent, just being focused, and be focused on long term. Those are the things you definitely want to do. What you don't want to do is start to just chase returns. There are a lot of things that you can scroll through Twitter, a lot of things you can scroll on YouTube and say, oh, I made 5,000% on this thing. And then you try it and then you lose money. Don't try and chase stuff. A lot of times you're going to end up losing more money than you make because you're, following someone else's strategy, and they may know more than you, or they could be, not necessarily leading you in the right direction. The other thing too, I'll mention is pay attention to how you're consuming the news. Yes, there are some things that you do want to pay attention to, but there are some things that probably just rile you up emotionally. Like I always say, that your emotions do not do math, and that is something you want to avoid. So, for example, in 2022, as the time that we're doing this recording, we saw that the stock market for the first 9 months of the year, so from January to September, it had fallen at the fastest pace it has since 2008, 2009. That sounds real bad, right? That sounds like, oh my God, red flag, everything's about to just sink, right? Well, the other half of this argument is we also know that the stock market right around today is exactly where it was in January of 2021. One of those sounds worse, right? One of those sounds like really, really bad. So you got to be able to say, look, I understand what's happening, but I don't need necessarily react every single time. I always say that our brains are programmed to remember the worst times, remember the worst storms, the hurricanes, all the bad stuff, the floods, but like all the other perfect days, Nobody pays attention to them. You don't really remember what was the best weather day you've ever had. And that happens in the market too. It is rare that we see years like 2022. I think if you go all the way back to 2000, we've only had about 5 years that have been negative, with the exception of this year. We'll see what happens at the end of the year. But that's 80% of the time the market is positive, but we hone in our minds about the worst times, and we hold on to those more than we do the positive times.
That's such a good point. I wonder why sometimes, when the stock market is down, you see people panicking and they sell their investments. And I'm like, that's the best time to buy. If you're going to buy, if you want to buy a house or car, you're not going to go when it's up. You're going to go when it's on sale,
Yeah, I mean, everybody says buy low, sell high, then it goes low, and nobody buys. I'm like, what was y'all saying this whole time?
It's very interesting. So it kind of leads me to the whole dollar cost averaging versus lump sum argument. I think that they say lump sum investing beats dollar cost averaging not 67% of the time, 67 to 33% of the time. Mm-hmm. But then if you did what people like me did on January 1st, when you maxed out your Roth IRA, you obviously are down quite a bit. So I think it would have been more advantageous to do the lump sum either at the end of the year or do dollar cost averaging. But the interesting thing is that you never know if it's going to go lower. So the bottom line is what? You should dollar cost average?
Well, really the bottom line is do what works for you. And I say that because, like you said, the data says that lump sum, just putting everything in at one time and leaving it alone, mathematically is better for you. The other side of this is not everybody has that lump sum at that point in time. So by default, a lot of people go to dollar cost averaging, which I think is better for most people. For $6,000, that everybody didn't have that, right? Or people who max out their 401ks in the first quarter, it's like, you had $20,000 laying around that you could do that with, which is great if you can, but most people don't. So I tend to veer towards the dollar cost averaging. It gets you into the habit of investing. I think it kind of puts you in a long-term mindset. And I think that tends to be one of the best places for new investors. And for people that are only investing small amounts, even if it's, $300, $400, $500 a month, it gets you into the habit and gets you into the rhythm of investing. I think that practice and that mindset is what can set you up for the future.
Hey, I agree with you 100%. And I have even changed my mindset about dollar cost averaging versus lump sum. I think the best way to invest is just to invest as early and as often as you can. Whenever your obligations are taken care of, if you have extra money laying around, if that's Friday or if that's Monday, throw it in the market,
Yep.
And you might get a deal. So there's a term out there, there's a phrase, to be fearful when others are greedy and greedy when others are fearful. Have you ever really taken that mindset when you go to invest, or do you just think, hey, it doesn't matter what day of the month it is, I'm good to go?
Yeah, I take both. I think when I feel like people aren't fearful enough, I'm just going to invest anyway. And that's kind of how my mantra is. Like, I was going to invest anyway. However, in times like this where the market is kind of weird, I may invest a little bit more into something. An example is as of today, Microsoft hit a 52-week low. I'm like, oh, bet we are absolutely investing more in a company like Microsoft, because I think it's one of the best companies and one of the best stocks out there. It just happens to be down. And whether I agree with it or not, I'm like, Microsoft definitely ain't going nowhere. So I'm going to go ahead and be a little bit more aggressive when everybody is fearful. So for me, I stick to my dollar cost averaging, but from time to time, if a stock is down significantly or something happens and I've got the extra cash, I'm definitely piling in.
It's awesome. And I think that it's important for people to know, especially new people who are getting into the market and just learning about the stock market. I think it's important to know that where you invest isn't always the most important. It is the fact that you actually are investing. We argue about dollar cost averaging and lump sum, and then we argue about index funds and stocks. But bottom line is, man, there's people sitting on the sideline or they have their money sitting in savings accounts, and that's not doing anything for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing. Like you should be doing something. It's easier to, let's say you invest in something and didn't work out. It's easier to kind of switch and make a mistake and make those adjustments, as opposed to like still sitting on the sideline altogether. And what I like to say too, 10 years from now, you're going to wish you started 10 years ago. Like that's the big thing here, is because you are not going to be able to catch up 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years from now. So, oh well, I wish I could have bought when the market was low. It's like, nah, your time is now. Your time is right now, not when the market recovers, because it's going to be more expensive and you're going to have less time, which is going to require more money for you to get to where you should be if you started today.
Absolutely. So I saw a stat yesterday, actually the other day I was looking at, and I'm going to go ahead and read you that stat. I just need to find it because it was pretty interesting. It was just talking about how, let me see where I put that. It was talking about how with Black home ownership, we are really nowhere further along than we were like in 1961. We have not we haven't closed the home ownership gap between African Americans and Caucasians. So what do you think? How is that something we're going to be doing with? You know, they have these funds, these programs like the Bank of America home loan program that people just totally threw out, and they had nothing but negative things to say about it. And they said that it actually would set us back. So what do you think? Like, how could we close that gap?
Yeah, I think so. Home ownership is a little difficult, especially now with interest rates rising and housing prices rising. I think, for African Americans, we've got to be a lot more strategic about where we try to own and try and really kind of like block together. And find areas like, some areas in Fort Worth and others where we can like, look, get an affordable house, create a community, and start to buy in places that make a lot of sense. I lived in New York and a starter home was $3 million. No, that wasn't gonna cut it. Like it wasn't gonna happen for me. So I moved to North Carolina and I was able to buy a house. Yeah. So I think a part of it is being strategic. Another part is using your family as leverage whenever possible. So this is something that I've really come around to more in the last 2 years than where I was maybe 10 years ago. And what I mean by that is, growing up in Tulsa, small town in Oklahoma, the goal was you grow up with 18, 22, whatever, and that you leave. You leave, you start your own thing, you just be independent on your own. And then when the pandemic hit, we were, our daughter was born in August. We kind of clustered together with my in-laws and we stayed there for a year. That allowed us to save so much money that we had enough for a down payment. We paid off like, I think 60, almost 70% of our student loans. We weren't paying daycare because we had help from grandparents, and also pandemic, daycare was closed. And that's what helped us to level up. And I think as a community, and we see this in other communities too, where staying a year or two after college or staying, 18 from ages 18 to 20 at home with your parents, which I know is not the sexiest idea in the world, but doing that and being able to save rent free for a few years can really set you up for generational wealth and really have you to save to be able to start that first house. So I think that's one thing that we should really consider a lot more. I've seen it in my wife's family, my in-laws, several times over, where my father-in-law moved out to North Carolina. Then baby brother came out, stayed with him for 2 years, got his own house. Then sister came up, stayed 2 years, and then went and got her own house back in Louisiana. And I sat back and was like, wait, that's a model of success. Like, why wouldn't I continue to do that, even though it's not, again, the sexiest thing in the world? I got 2 kids. I'm like, do I really want y'all to stay another 2 years? But do I really want to help y'all build generational wealth? Yes or no? So I think that's something we should really consider and make sure that we are doing the things necessary to help necessitate home ownership in the best way that we can.
Man, those are some really good points. Real estate is such an important piece of the puzzle when it comes to building generational wealth and building a successful future for yourself and for your family. I even think that, we need to be strategic as far as like, if we are going to college, if we're sending our kids to college, which I don't think that every kid is going to go to college. We all know that. But if you're going to send them out there, hey, why don't you get a piece of, real estate, a fourplex or a triplex, rent it out, rent 2 sides out or 3 sides out to be able to cover your own child so that everything's covered. So just being more strategic with how we move. So, hey, those are some really good points, man. Hey, so before I let you go, I know we talked a little bit about Black Wall Street. Do you know much about the whole Tulsa real estate fund deal or what? Do you have some kind of opinion on that?
Oh, I've got some opinions on it.
Okay. I think I know what those opinions may be.
Yeah. So. Yeah. So again, I'm born and raised in Tulsa from Hawthorne Elementary all the way to Booker T. Washington High School, the historic Booker T. Washington High School. And for me, I'm not a fan at all of the Tulsa Real Estate Fund for a bunch of reasons. Primarily, I think it appropriated and took the name and legacy of Tulsa without paying any real homage. They didn't give any money to the survivors. It's not based in Tulsa. There are no properties that was supposed to be invested in Tulsa at all. It was a marketing ploy and really took, like, imagine taking your greatest family tragedy and watching someone else sell it as an investment and you get no proceeds at all. And that is one of the worst tragedies in American history. But this is my actual neighborhood. My house is on Greenwood. When you start to look at the maps that you see, whether it's in the HBO show, I think Washington Post had an amazing virtual map of what all was burned down. My house is on the corner there. So my actual legacy, both now and then, is related to that. And for somebody to come in, hey, we're just going to brand this. We're going to come here, do a photo op, and you'll never see us again. That was the first error. And then those who were running it, there were extremely high fees with very low returns. And it just felt like a marketing ploy, and it was. And the proceeds go back to Atlanta or wherever these people are from. I just didn't think that was the best way to go through it without having people from Tulsa on the board, without consulting, whether it's local politicians or the actual survivors. Like, no one included us in the process. And it's disingenuous and it's expensive for those who are part of the fund to use our name for profit and not include us in any parts of that process.
Oh, I guess we could drop the mic on that one. Well, Kevin Matthews II, can you go ahead and please let everybody know how they can find you and, you know, what all they can do to get in touch with you if they need any assistance with their finances?
Yeah. You can catch me on all things social media and all things internet at Building Bread. I have a YouTube channel you can go to youtube.com/buildingbread and you can find all my information there. I do brand new videos Monday through Friday, answering questions, helping you understand what's going on in the market. And then you can find more about me and my company and what I do at buildingbread.com.
And if you go ahead and send me that information all through IG, what I'll do, I'll drop it in the description on the YouTube video. And I will get that taken care of. But man, I really appreciate you. There's so many other things you could have been doing this morning, and just for you to sit here and dedicate your time to me, I'm truly appreciative of it. All right.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
All right, man. I appreciate you, and we'll be talking soon.
All right.
All right.